In just over a year, in 1986 and 1987, two women redefined the palette and aesthetic of one of the most iconic comic book characters in history. Ask any comic book fan and they'll likely tell you that 1986 changed comics, for better or worse, with the release of two seminal miniseries from DC. The first was a superhero satire, Watchmen, written by Alan Moore, drawn by Dave Gibbons, and unforgettably coloured by John Higgins. The second and more important to this story was The Dark Knight Returns, written and penciled by Frank Miller, inked by Klaus Janson, with hand-painted colours by Lynne Varley. The striking reimagining of Batman placed the hero in a desolate future Gotham where mutant gangs roamed the streets, and Bruce Wayne has hung up the cowl after the death of his sidekick, Jason Todd. He doesn't stay retired for long though, as he heads back to the streets to fight the mutant menace, picking up a new iconic sidekick in Carrie Kelly, the first female Robin. The Dark Knight Returns is often referred to as one of the best comics ever made, and helped cement Miller as a comic book superstar. At the time, it became one of the biggest selling graphic novels ever, and still regularly tops bestseller lists. It also, along with Watchmen, reframed the medium through a new lens that highlighted the adult readership and breadth of stories that could be told in the sequential storytelling form. But without Varley's distinct and experimental colours, the book would have been unlikely to have had the same impact. She and Miller shook up the way comics were coloured, with Varley using gouache paints, allowing her more nuanced shades and choice in colour than her counterparts. The more common process at the time was creating colour guides for newsprint, in which the colourist would choose a colour to show the printer and they would do their best to replicate it. But with Varley's paintings and the prestige format of the book, the replication was far closer to her vision. Varley's stark and experimental choices that were honed in her previous collaboration with Miller Ronin here redefined the superhero silhouette. Speaking of which, one of the most famous and aped aspects of The Dark Knight Returns is its iconic cover that sees Batman jumping in shadow across a lightning bolt. This is possible once again thanks to Varley's incredible painted backgrounds. The process work and cover from the book are incredible to look at. Janson and Miller's line works would be printed onto acetate, and then Varley would paint the colours on paper underneath. Though it sounds extremely complex, it was a pretty regular practice for comics colorists who used paint as their favourite tool. In The Dark Knight Returns, Varley uses her painting as a way to control the reader's mood and direct their emotion. There are pages where the palettes feel limited and monochromatic, only to explode into colour on the next page turn. Commissioner Gordon's world is black and white and noirish space, but the mutants live in neon lights and flickering Technicolor bulbs. Bruce's world is shadowed and dark, apart from the bright spark of Jason Todd's primary coloured costume, a reminder of the light that he's lost and the one he's soon to gain in Carrie Kelly. Throughout the book, Varley relies on the colours of Batman's own costume, grey and blue and yellow, washing the world in the hero even when he's not on the page. And a famed splash of Superman that opens the third issue, he stands white-shirted, blue skies around him, evoking not only his costume, but his eyes, his purity, his heroism, and his kindness. That's the power of Varley's colours brought starkly to life in one page. In 1987, Frank Miller followed up The Dark Knight Returns with another lauded Batman comic. Year one saw Miller team up with artist David Mazzucchelli for what would become a defining Batman origin tale. The moody story focused on the early days of Gotham's most famous son through the eyes of his sometimes ally Jim Gordon. Joining the pair was Mazzucchelli's wife, artist and painter Richmond Lewis, whose distinct colour palette is key to building the noir-hued atmosphere of the book. Drenching the Gotham Knights in vibrant neon pinks and deep shadow, the original 4-issue miniseries is a visual masterwork in contrast. It's also a hugely influential visual landscape for Gotham, with Mazzucchelli and Lewis's work impacting adaptations for decades, including Matt Reeves' recent The Batman. But one of the most interesting things about Lewis's connection to Batman Year One is that she entirely recolored the book for its first collected edition. In the original 4-issue miniseries, and my personal favorite version of the colors, Lewis used the regular 4-color printing spectrum that was common for newsprint comics. Just a year later though, she hand-painted the entire book again for a hardcover collection. This choice was to take advantage of the full process printing that the collection would utilize. The first issue of DC's Direct Currents newsletter in 1988 highlighted that hardcover collection, and in an interview, Lewis explained how that changed her approach to coloring the issues. I wanted to bring a sense of drama to the story, from simple color to the more complex, she shared. But overall, it's pretty restrained. I tried to use a limited palette, so you won't see every colour on every page, except in those places where the full range is used for. Her choices here brought a stark realism to the pages. Blue skies replaced pink, faces took on multiple hues, and Richmond redefined her own work and the legacy of Batman Year One. This version of Richmond's work would become the definitive and most widely seen iteration of her colours. It was, until a highly controversial 2012 reprint that Mazzucchelli himself denounced, the only version, including a slightly remastered 2005 reprint. So these were the colours that were put into eager readers' hands when they asked for the Batman story that they had to read. It's rare that one colourist gets to tell a story in 2 lights, in 2 palettes, and for each of them to be equally impactful. Until 2016, it was actually impossible to get a collected version of the original coloured issues, but as meticulously documented on the Ultimate Batman Comics website, in an absolute edition of the series, DC published 2 copies of the collection. One that was remastered colours by the creative team, and the other that was the original process work based on Richmond and Mazzucchelli's own scans of the printed pages. It was this release that finally allowed fans to own collections of both iterations of Richmond's Year 1 work. Nowadays, digital colours and advanced printing have allowed artists to push mood and tone in ways undreamt of before. Yet the restraint and creativity expressed by Varley and Lewis still serve as bold inspirations today, beacons of what fantastic colours can do to elevate comic books. The life that their hues brought to Batman and Gotham continue to spark the imagination of storytellers across all mediums, with the Batman only the latest superhero success to utilise the fantastic vision of these 2 talented women.